Hi, welcome to the Q&A. Sorry, it's a bit echoey in here. So I'm just going to go through a couple of general queries really that came up. Some of them are from the Rose tutorial and some I've sort of picked out of the Rose tutorial. Things that I think people seem to have struggled with the most in that one. I've got to say though, all of the drawings are brilliant, and I'm not just saying that because I know personally how difficult it is, especially when you're starting out, to get results, and the results are really fantastic. So obviously that's fantastic teaching from me. But really, well done guys, you've done so well. And with all of these tutorials, they are mainly about obviously learning. So if you do it once, take a break from it, because personally I get frustrated with my own drawings. But then if you can stomach it, come back to it again a couple of weeks or a couple of months time and redo it. So first, number one tip, when you've done a piece, I give you feedback on a Friday at the moment, but you yourself can critique your own work. So grab yourself a notebook and make this your studio notebook. And in that, write down what you think worked, what you think went well in this for that piece, and what you think you could improve on next time you do it. Because I'm the same, I'll do a piece and once it's finished, I'll think that was the downfall for this drawing. Next time I come to use similar techniques, I can address that from the beginning. So it's really useful to keep a little studio diary and also write down the things that you enjoyed about it. The whole point of this is, of course, to enjoy what you're doing. So, first question that came up is not related specifically to the tutorial, but it's quite a useful one, storage. So I have major storage issues. We are in a very small barn conversion, quite an echoey barn conversion, and there isn't a lot of storage. In fact, we've only got 3 rooms. We have a living space, a bedroom and a bathroom. So my studio is actually at the end of the living space. My partner is very tolerant of the smell of paint and all the rest of it. So I've had to become quite innovative with the way that I store my work. So I'll have taken some photos so I can show you. For my larger pieces, I've got a really great cabinet. It looks ugly, admittedly, but you can get these cabinets online and they're very expensive, and they're for storing work in, and they've got very shallow drawers so that you can keep paper. And generally speaking, they'll go up to an A1 size, a little bit bigger, so you can keep your biggest work in it. Now, they are hundreds of pounds, and my dad had this cabinet at work, completely redundant, and he's a little bit handy, so he took a saw, screws and various other implements to this and made me a wonderful cabinet. So you don't obviously need something as big as this. This is my full-time job and I produce a lot of rubbish, really. I produce a lot of stuff, so I've got a lot of stuff to keep. But if you can give yourself a drawer somewhere, that's really great. If you haven't got space for that, don't worry about it. How I started is with a box. And again, this box was lying around. I'm not even sure where it's from. And it's just about the right size to keep 25 by 35 pieces of paper in. And that is I think it's quarter size pastel matte paper. That's how big it comes. So if you can get yourself something that you can keep at least a quarter size piece of paper in, that is so useful. So I literally pile them up in here. You can see it's a wooden box. I keep it nice and flat, and that keeps them really safe. And when I started out and I just didn't have space to store big works, this is what I do. I keep smaller works and I keep them in a box. The reason I prefer a box to a folder, put that down, is that folders can get squished and you don't want to be putting too much pressure onto your work. So the way to store your work, even inside a box, you need crystal paper. Now usually I'd have a sheet of paper that would cover the whole drawing. I really need to order some more crystal paper, I've run out. This is just very low tack artist tape, and it doesn't leave a mark on my drawing. It's absolutely excellent stuff. I use it all the time. And I've just tacked a piece of crystal paper over the drawing, which is actually, give you a little look, it's next month's project. We're on a farm, so we're going to be surrounded by lambs soon. So I couldn't resist for April doing a lamb. So cover your drawing, whether it's finished or not, with crystal paper in between working on it, and put it somewhere flat. So if you've got a box, great. If you've got a cupboard, like with some flat drawers, even better. So that's one way to store them. I'll take a picture of the next one. Might tidy it up first. But another one I've got is a very tall, slim bookcase, and that's my bigger work, which really is more for paintings on boards, to be honest. But it's another way that you could keep your work. And a way to keep framed work, if you haven't got space on the walls for your framed work, which is the best way to store it until it's sold, whatever you're doing with it. Again, the bottom of a wardrobe, if you've got a wardrobe for long items like coats or dresses or something, stack up your paintings in the bottom of that wardrobe, stood up if you like, and of course all the long garments in there help to keep it safe. So that's a really great use of that space in there, and it does protect your paintings very well. So the next question, which is more about actually drawing, is how do I choose my pastel paper colour? Now, you'll be slightly frustrated to hear this is somewhat a personal choice, but of course there is a certain amount of theory that I use to inform my choice. So the first thing to think about is what kind of effect you want to go for. If you want the subject to bounce out and have quite a lot of energy, then you're thinking more about contrasting your colours. Now, I've written a blog post on colours. I'll be writing more on them. There's loads and loads of information on the internet about colour theory. But in simple terms, if you've got your colour wheel, any colours that are opposite on the wheel are complementary colours, and it means that they bounce against each other. So red and green should never be seen. They are complementary colours. Orange and blue, my personal favourites, they are complementary colours. Yellow and purple are complementary colours. So they're all opposites on the colour wheel. So that's a really good method for picking out a colour of card that's going to make your subject bounce out. Now there are a couple of provisos with that. So if I grab one of my examples, here's one I did earlier. So we've got a robin here. Now robins, to me, they're not just really cute birds, they've got quite a lot of character and they've got quite a bit of force as well, and they often own their garden. You'll have a robin to a garden. They're very territorial birds. So I wanted the robin to appear quite strong. I wanted it to contrast against the paper, so I tend to draw them on blue because the red breast, which is really more orange, red and orange are complementary colours, and it's going to bounce out of the paper like so. The rose that we did, the rose is red, so if I wanted that to really bounce out, then I might have drawn it on something like a blue or a green, or a lovely teal colour actually. This one from the bee. That would really make the colours pop, but the rose is quite a gentle drawing. It's very relaxing. So I've gone for a colour of card that is going to reflect that. It makes the drawing much softer, but it goes further than that. So for all of these lessons that I'm doing, and in fact for most of the drawings that I do, you can run up a little palette like this. And there are a couple of reasons for doing this. Firstly, it can be good to run through a couple of the technique areas. So I'm just checking how the colours are going to layer up. But you'll find that if you make these little palettes, and some of them like this are really messy, and I've got these small swabs of colour from the different pencils. If we take a colour, say a green, and we drew the green on top of the blue, it's going to look one way. If we drew it on top of the grey, it's going to come out different. So that is something to bear in mind. The lighter colours of card, such as this one, I think this is called Maize off the top of my head, because it's such a light colour, the all of the pastel pencils show up as being quite dark on it, and that is something to consider. So some of the brighter, zestier greens, which usually I usually draw on sand or light blue, which are tonally, they're darker than this. They would appear brighter on those darker boards, but on the lighter coloured board, they're going to show up as a darker pencil. They're contrasting differently against that colour. So that is something to consider, because it totally changes how your pencils work, and sometimes not for the better. So some of the drawings people have been doing and posting, sometimes people have drawn them on a lighter colour. I think there was a rose that was done on a light grey, and I think there's a bumblebee being done on a white or a light grey at the minute, and the colours show up as being much darker, and also some of them appear much more saturated as well. We've got a lot more colour coming through. So you can end up with slightly bolder and sometimes even garish paintings. So I prefer to opt for the sandy colour, which is what we did the nuthatch on. This tonally is probably about a tone 5 or 6 on a tonal scale of 1 to 10, 1 being black, 10 being white. And that makes it quite a soft background to work with. I get lovely neutral tones on this, which for nature is very good, because of course all of the tones that we can see outside are quite muted, certainly in England. So going for a soft board like this tends to work. The lighter coloured board that we've got here, as you can see, this is, I can't wait to do this one. This is for an iris tutorial that we're going to be doing in summer. I think it's June. And because the iris is a flower and it's quite a bright flower, I've gone for a lighter coloured card that is going to allow these colours to shine out. And I've also gone for a card, you can see it's sort of a warm buttery colour, and that complements the purple, because yellow and purple, as I said, they're complementary colours. So this is working double time. It's complementing the colour on the flower, and because this is a light coloured board, all of these colours are showing up as richer and darker. So when it comes to choosing your colour of card, I would get some different colours of paper, and they come in so many different colours. You can get little tester packs, which are quite good, and just draw yourself a little palette. So I recently drew a palette for a kingfisher on dark green and realised it was a revelation and it looks amazing. But sometimes you just can't get the range of colour or tone that you need in the board that you've chosen. If it's too light, some of your colours are just going to show up as too dark, and you can't make the colours light enough. Even a light grey can look quite dark on a white board. And similarly, if your board is too dark for some subjects, it's going to mean that all of your colours look too bright and you can't get them dark enough. So that's why I opt for those boards that are in the middle, the sand and the light blue. They tend to be a safe bet if you're not really sure where to go. Now, another couple of things that popped up from the rose tutorial. So one of the problems that came up was filling in the tooth of the card. Now I'm going to do another short demo on this, but this is demonstrated in the thistle tutorial. The thistle tutorial is your beginner's guide. So if you haven't done that, I would thoroughly recommend going back through, because it covers all of my my core techniques, and they're worth returning to keep practicing. But to cover the tooth of the card, you just need to press harder. I know for some, you can feel like you're about to ruin your drawing, and this is where I would wholly suggest that you just practice. So I'm going to show you again the little drills that you can do. Go back through those and aim to make mistakes when you're testing it out. Really push the pastel and see what it can do. See what happens when you put too much pastel down, because by putting too much pastel down, you can learn when to stop in your actual drawing. So for the centre of the rose, quite a lot of people struggle to get that bright enough, and in the centre of my rose, I've used some of the light pink and the light grey, but I've also been quite careful to use my more saturated colours. Those pencils that are much brighter have been used in the centre, whereas the colours around the outer petals are much more desaturated. We've got those darker tones in there, and the brighter pencils that are used in here have been mixed into those darker tones, and it tones them down. down. So they're desaturated, which means they're just going to sit back a little bit, whereas the centre of the rose tonally is a bit lighter, but in terms of saturation is much bolder, and that's going to jump forwards and towards us. So that's a planning point, that you want to make sure you're not putting too many dark, muddy colours into these petals. If you rewatch the tutorial, you'll see that although I put dark into the shadows between each petal, I didn't put them onto the actual petals themselves, that 175, which is that dark grey. You don't want to be putting that on any of these petals apart from the gaps in between them, which are the core shadows. So to make the centre of your rose come forward, if you do this tutorial again, you want to focus your brighter, more saturated colours on these petals in the centre, and then of course use your light colours, your light grey and your light pink, and by contrast the outer petals are much softer and darker and duller. Another point on that, and I was so impressed with all of your water droplets. They are absolutely beautiful. They've brought all of the flowers to life. But the main thing I noticed was you all got a bit carried away, like me, and that they were all really good. And because they were all so good, quite a lot of people kept them all very bright, which is so tempting when you've put something really good down. But what you need to do, and again, this helps the centre pull forwards towards us, you need to just tap with a clean finger. You need to tap the water droplets that are around the edges, and it will push them into the pastel beneath, and it will knock them back tonally. They'll become a little bit softer and a little bit duller. The ones in the centre can be brighter, and the ones on top can be brighter because the sun is coming on the top of the rose. But overall, your roses really were fantastic. I definitely made a mistake and put it down as a beginner. It clearly wasn't a beginner. I'm very sorry about that. So I'll also do a little demonstration on muddy colours and showing you how to make a muddy colour out of these rose pencils. And I'd encourage you to do that and purposely try to make mud with your pencils so that you can see where you're going wrong. Nothing is wrong, if you like. You can do what you want, of course, but it is useful to know the limitations of your pencils, and when you get to that point where it's turned very dull and you can't bring it back, because you will get to that point. If you've overfilled your card and you've kept mixing and mixing and mixing, you won't be able to save the drawing. Okay, so time for that quick demo on what will help you get that centre of the rose to come up and forward. So as I was just saying, the middle of the rose has got more saturation, it's got more colour. It's also a bit lighter because we've added in the greys and that light pink, and the outer colours are darker and they're a little bit more purple too. So let's look at how we can do that and also address filling in the card at the same time. So if we begin with our 175, and that is your really dark grey, I'm going to first show you what really filling in the card is. So I'm going to press nice and hard. Now you should be able to see that what has occurred is pastel dust. So if I give that a little tap, you can see that there is small amounts of dust coming off the card. I haven't touched that, I just tapped it. That's when you know that you've really filled in the card. So if we fill it in too much, totally oversaturated it, it can't take any more colour because it's just getting piles and piles and piles of dust on there. I'm just going to tap that off. And then if we try and add in our next colour, which is the 1669, you can see that's got really short and waiting on more pencils to arrive, and press hard. So I'm now pressing as hard as I possibly can, and I've got mud. I'm amazed it showed up as well as it has, to be honest. So tap that off again. So that is a really muddy colour, because if I just put this next to that patch, you can see what the 169 looks like by itself. So you can see, obviously it's much lighter, but it's got a bit more colour to it. So this is when you've filled in the card too much, you're going to get muddy colours. And this goes throughout all of the pencils. So again, if you put too much of this down, this is the 169. And then we go to the next colour, 194. Let's see. It's not mixing in all that well. It's a horrible noise. It's all becoming very flat. And if we put some of the 194 here, you can see that we're not getting as much colour. We've oversaturated the board, and if you've realised that you've taken a section too dark and you're trying to avidly take it lighter, let's use a lighter pencil on top of that patch. So 127, we're just not going to be able to get there. Look, that's really dark compared to that actual pencil. So this is when you get muddy colours, when you have too much pastel down, that all of the subsequent layers are just mixing into basically the mixing pot that you've provided for yourself. So that can happen with the darker colours and with the lighter colours. If you add too many of these lighter colours, you go 127, 226, 118. If you keep mixing and mixing and mixing, you will get to the point where you can't get each colour to individually show up, and you end up with a muddy mixing pot. So I'll just show you that now. So let's say that we take these lighter colours. So it's 226. I'm going to press really, really hard. And then over the 226, let's go with the 127. It's hardly showing up. It's making it a bit milkier, but we're ending up with a mess. And 118. And you can see that compared to the actual 118, it's just making a mess. But more than that, we've actually damaged the board. So blow that off, you can see how much dust there was on there. It might not show up very well on the camera, I'm not sure, but there are some dark patches running through here. Now, of course, you've seen we haven't used a dark pencil. What it's done is actually damaged the pastel mat. So some of you might have noticed this in some of your drawings. I used to do it a lot when I started, and I'd put so much pastel on the board and I'd press so hard that it actually just comes off, and all I get is this dark sort of horrible shadow coming through it, and you can't cover it up by that point. That is your card kaput. So that's when you just have to totally restart your drawing from scratch. So that is filling in the card, and obviously that is filling in the card too much. So if we just go to make a nice base with the 169, so I'm not pressing as hard. So if I put a layer down like this, you can see it's still a little bit grainy, so I'm not pressing very hard. I'll just go and put another layer over the top. So all I'm doing is being nice and light with the pencil and swirling layers onto it. By swirling the pencil as I'm going around, this is true for florals, where there is less direction, sorry about that, my speaker, where there is less direction within the subject. As I said in the tutorial, we've got the directions on the petals where they are flowing, like here. But it's very important that we fill in the tooth of the card. So you can swirl your pencil around for that underpainting. And what it's going to do is push it. It's going to push it into the tooth of the card. So then if we go to another colour, making an absolute mess with all my pencils here, with the 194, we start to swirl that in. I'm not damaging the card here, mixing together nicely, and there's enough tooth on the card that I can get a nice shine with this 194 showing over the top. If you remember, this was me putting the 194 over the 169 last time. You can see this patch has got more colour than this patch over here. And then I can gradually build that colour outwards and go to my next colour. I haven't got my instruction manual here, but I think it was 139. Sorry if this is not quite the right order. Go slightly over that previous pencil and grow it again to the right. And I'd really recommend you doing this exercise. This is a grading exercise, just like we do with the thistles. Let's go to our next colour. 127, that might not be quite the right order. I don't think it is it? It was 118 actually, but we'll go with 226. Now we're just going on the pinks. Doesn't matter too much because we're not actually drawing the rose. We are getting lighter and lighter. And we're getting pinker as well. There's a lot more saturation in there. So you can see here where I'm blending the two pinks together. I'm not getting that horrible dark patch in the middle, which I got last time because I damaged the board. Doesn't make sense, but I'll finish off with the red, just so you can see it down. By putting this red on, you can actually start to see how the colours are popping and jarring against each other, because the red and the pink clash, they really clash, and that's really great for us because that's what's going to give us this bouncy vibrancy in the middle of the rose here. It's that bounce between these brighter colours, the reds and the hot pinks, and that vibrancy is what's going to pull the middle of the rose out and towards us. So if I show you that, not as petals, but I show you that as groups of colour. So some of the colours we used for those bottom petals: 175. Bit of that, bit of the 169. I'm just being nice and rough here. I'm just getting some colour down to show you the difference. Bit of that 194, that deep purpley colour that just starts to take us out of the bland shadows. And we used a bit of the 194 as well, which is more opaque. It's got more white in it and it's brighter. That's starting to become a gentle mid-tone now. And I seem to recall we did use some of the lighter colours, maybe the 226. I think we used a bit of the red as well in those bottom petals. So some of the pink in there. We'd get an effect somewhere like that, and that is potentially a bit brighter than some of these, certainly these bottom petals. And then of course we use some of the grey and the light pink over that as well. I actually ran out of my light pink, but I'll pop a small amount of the grey on there. Although I'm using the wrong grey. Well done, Emily. The mid grey, wasn't it? Just to give us a bit of a sheen. A bit more of that 226. Okay, so that is similar to the base, all the colours that are in those bottom petals. And then if we contrast that with the colours on the top petals, we've got some of this 118. We do have a bit of the 175 in the middle because we've got those really sharp edges where we've got the core shadow. So again, another difference. We've got sharp edge between a shadow and a brighter area, so that we're getting a bounce, a big contrast, whereas on the lower petals, it's a gradual thing. And then over that gap a little bit with the 169. You can see I'm not going for actual petals or particularly the direction marks on the petals either. I'm just putting the colours down. Of the 194, I want to leave an area free of the darker colours so that I can really hit it hard with the lighter colours. And then we'll go into the lighter section with the 193, which, as I say, is the more opaque version, and then we can start to pile up the brighter colours. This is the 226 and the 127. Which is really bright. That 127 is so saturated, and that is bouncing. Now this is where I would use the light pink as well, which, as I say, unfortunately I haven't got any 132 at the minute, so I'll just put some of the 230 on top instead. A bit more of those bright colours. Love that red and the pink bouncing against each other. So what we've got here is very rough and ready, but the idea is to show you how we can use colour as well as tone to pull the center of the rose forward. So between those two, this one looks like it's bouncing out, partly because we've got this great contrast between the shadow and the lighter colors, whereas here we've got a very soft gradation, something you can practice. And then also because the saturation is much more intense and these colors are much, much brighter. They are catching the light. And because they're catching the light, they are coming out and towards us. These colors are duller by comparison. They're still quite beautiful. We've got some lovely purples in there, but by comparison to this section, they appear fairly muted. And then of course with the highlights, you've got much duller lights on the darker petals. And then on those central petals, we've got some of the light grey, and we would have the light pink as well. So see that there is actually dust coming off these so that the card is fully saturated. So for people who are struggling to fully saturate the card, just give it a go. Try taking it too far, press really hard so that you damage the card, obviously on some scrap like this, and then play to get the card fully saturated but not damaged. So as I say, my layers are fairly light, and I am just going backwards and forwards, and I'm using this sort of circular motion like this, and that is mixing the pastel together. And because of that, you can then quite easily layer up. Of course, if you think, I have got enough pastel down there, it's just not quite pushed into that nook or cranny, you can just take a clean finger and just help it along. So you can see that patch, the board is fully saturated, but the application is still quite fine, which means if I was to go on top of it with a bright pencil, pick one that's really going to show up for you. If I was to go on top of it with a bright pencil, you can see there is plenty of card there for these brighter pencils to get purchase on the card and show up, whereas if we go to this section here, nothing's happening. That is the same amount of pressure and absolutely nothing is happening there, whereas there we've got lots of detail showing up. So that's what I would suggest. I'd suggest you go back to the Thistle tutorial and practice grading your pencils. Have a little think about areas of your painting that need to fall back, and where they need to fall back, try and make them duller. They might not always need to be dark like with the rose, but they don't need as much colour, which means you should be relying more on your greys and your browns. This is something we're also going to address in the lamb tutorial, and we've addressed it in the nuthatch tutorial. And then the areas that are focal and are coming out and towards us, they're closer to the viewer, they will probably have more colour, and it's likely that you can get more definition because we can see what's going on. So the separation between dark and light is going to be more defined than in those areas of your painting which are further away from us and we can't see as much detail. So I really hope that helps. And I've just remembered, I didn't cover in storing of your painting. Somebody asked about Fixative. I don't use Fixative. I've got a massive can here and I've used it once or twice. This is the reason why I don't use it. So I'm using it from correct distance. Just wave that off. What I find is, now typically that hasn't shown up actually too badly on here, but I can see it in the light. I get a speckled effect using it, and I have tried this in lots of different, from different lengths away from my board as well, but I specifically find on the pastel matte board it actually stains it. Which of course, once you've finished a painting, is so frustrating, especially on the light. So I had some whites and greys and I left it for a day or two as well to really make sure that it wasn't just, you know, sinking in and drying. Did it from the correct distance, did it outside, and unfortunately it's speckled. Now it's not the brand that's the problem. I'm not having a go at Sinelia, but I think it's the pastel matte board that doesn't like it. But you don't need it on a pastel matte board. That is the point of this stuff, which is why it's quite expensive, but it's really great to use. So all you need to do is cover your work with crystal paper and that will be absolutely fine. So that's it for this time. So we've covered how to store your work, which is really important. If you're not going to get it framed, you at least want to keep it safe. We've also looked at how to pick the colour of your pastel mat, and we're going to discuss that a little bit more with the lamb, which is coming out just before Easter Sunday. That's quite a long tutorial, but that's going to be a really useful one. And then a couple of the general issues with the rose drawing. But honestly, I'm so impressed with everybody's work, and I really look forward to Fridays and seeing what everyone's been up to. So I'm going to go and reply to all of your beautiful drawings now, and I hope you enjoy the next few weeks of tuition. Thanks for watching.